my love is working with horses, and part of that is working with horses with problems. One of the horses that had enormous problems was at a Arabian horse farm, and he was so crippled that they had retired him at the age of 16. Arabians go to about 35, so that was not a real retirement age. I was told that he had something called shivers, which affected his hind legs. A chiropractor came to look at him and said he had a huge knot along his back, and he suspected it was more than shivers. So I was asked to take him on as a project, and I started exercising him. His hind end was so weak that when he backed up, he almost would collapse. He also, when ridden, he couldn't tolerate anyone on his back. You couldn't catch him to put a halter on him. He'd run the other way. And if you did get on his back, his ears would go right back, and he couldn't stand still. He'd start to jig, and then he'd start to trot, and then he'd start to run, and then he'd start to rear. So he wasn't usable at all. Anyway, I started working with him, exercising him every day. And 6 weeks later, the chiropractor comes back and he says the knot in his back, this huge muscle knot, is completely gone. So I'm thinking, well, maybe it's more than shivers. So I go onto the internet and I start looking up shivers, and I find that it just affects the hind end of these horses and there's no cure. And then I keep reading all the papers I can on this disease, and I find out that 15 or 20% of these horses have another disease called equine polysaccharide storage myopathy. Well, since I have a science background, I know that means horse sugar storage problem. And I start reading all that I can on this disease, and it turns out that some horses can't handle the sugar that's in their diet, and the sugar doesn't get taken into the energy mechanism called Krebs cycle, and instead gets stored in a negative place and causes these horses to become crippled, almost psychotic. They're unpredictable, they're in pain, their muscles are breaking down, just a whole bunch of problems. And this horse had every one. So I decided to, the treatment, I found some papers that talked about substituting sugar, which is polysaccharide, using fats as a substitute to give them less sugar and more fats. And one doctor has recommended a certain amount of oil in addition to exercise. I went to the owner, and she says, no, I don't think horses are supposed to have oil or fat. So one night I can't sleep, and I get up and I pull up Krebs cycle, because from my background in science, I remembered that Krebs cycle is the mechanism where the body, each cell, takes in sugar and sends it through a series of reactions, and out pops energy. Something's wrong with this horse's Krebs cycle. And I see 3 different variations on the internet, and I look at each chart, and the third chart at the bottom had a very interesting sentence. They all take in sugar and they all put out energy. This particular one had a sentence at the bottom that said, in the absence of sugar, this cycle works fine with oil. Well, fat, which is oil. So I said, okay, if I can get this horse, I'm now convinced that this is okay, that the cell will work, restricting sugar and promoting fat. And so I convinced the owner to let me start slowly giving this horse oil. Now, I'd been exercising him, but I was afraid to get on his back. One day after I'd been exercising him, I don't know, several months later, I saddled him up and I got on his back for 30 seconds, and nothing bad happened. So the next day I got on for a minute, and the next time for 2 minutes. And as the weeks went by, I started riding this horse. I was exercising him probably 3 or 4 times a week and gradually increasing his oil. And I was riding him with difficulty. He still was difficult to manage, and I would give him a grade every day. And some days he would get a D, and some days he would get a B-. But he never got better than a B-. So I'm thinking, I'm doing all of this work, but something else is missing. So I went back to all the literature that I had read before, and I reread every paper I could find. And I found there was a third disease that's actually part of the second disease. It's called Monday morning disease. These are from the Amish people who would work their horses very, very hard for 6 days a week. And on the 7th day, the horses would rest. And then when they went to start again, these horses were in pain and on the ground and almost couldn't be prodded to get up and start working again. They found that these horses had a variation of the equine polysaccharide storage myopathy. But since they were getting so much exercise, the sugars in their system were being taken up. And on one day of not getting the exercise, that caused them to go backwards and go into pain and muscle retraction. So what I learned was even one day without exercise means these horses would fall apart. So I went back to my horse, and instead of exercising him 3 or 4 days a week, I made a commitment, because I understood what this paper was telling me, that almost like a diabetic with too much sugar, one day with sugar and you're sick. And so I wanted to see what would happen if I was completely consistent. And this horse was now getting 2 medicines, 2 cups of oil, and daily exercise, a minimum of 45 minutes. And when I started this regime, he went from an unpredictable horse to the best horse in the barn. He became perfect. His muscles had built up, his stamina had built up, he was no longer in pain, he was no longer a problem to go get in the pasture, he was no longer chomping at the bit and rearing. I had taught him verbally to walk slowly, and with me on his back in no pain, he could walk slowly, he could trot slowly. He would do anything I asked, and he took very good care of me as long as he was being exercised every single day. He was starting to get A's and A minuses. So I was very happy that I had the ability to understand Krebs cycle, to have the confidence to read the papers, know what I was learning on them, and apply it to fixing this hopeless, really miserable horse. So I felt that having my background was a tremendous asset to working with this horse.